How's it going? I'm Andrew McCulloch. This is the overview of my development vlogs for my final year animation, Chained. Chained as an animation sort of all began as wanting to make something a bit fun and a bit different. I was on a project from the start of last year that I wasn't really I burnt out on because I wasn't really enjoying it. It wasn't for me, and yet I just wanted to give myself a project that I'm purely working on for my own enjoyment outside of the work that I do professionally. Obviously, whenever I decided to change project, this was just after Christmas, so just after done my dissertation. So realistically, by the end of December, I was only giving myself about 3 months to make this entire animation, as opposed to the sort of 8 or 9 months that I should have had if I was working on the same project from last September. But that was just me shooting myself in the foot. But I was committed to making something cool for myself. So if I was passionate about working on the project, I would put more time into it than just grinding through what I was currently working on or just stopping the course altogether. So I thought it was a better option of the three. So it all really started, I was looking on Epidemic Sound, just looking through some music because I quite like the idea of making something to music, almost like a music video. So I was looking through Epidemic Sound and I stumbled across a song called Chained, which is, funny enough, where it all began. So at the sort of time, I just finished binging Black Sails on Amazon, which is obviously this pirate show, and I'd fallen clean back into an obsession with the whole era, the whole aesthetic, all the stories from that sort of golden era of piracy, and I just sort of fallen straight back into that. So so I was sitting listening to this song, Chained, and within about 15 minutes, all these sort of scenes, this sort of story started coming to me. I guess just as I was listening to it, as I was going through, I was repeating it, and I just started scribbling down within 15 minutes of just listening to this song and scribbling. I'd made up the storyboard on just some scrap paper that I had. So, as it all came to me in that sort of stereotypical, gotta get this on a piece of paper and go from there idea, that's realistically where this whole animation started. And yeah, just as I was sort of picturing these scenes and picturing editing to the music, picturing where these cuts could be, picturing what it would look like in the end, I just sort of, I got back on board with finishing the degree and finishing it with something that I loved. And yeah, I guess just that was from this, finding that song, it was just like, right, I'm gonna actually enjoy doing this, and I was ready to make something, I guess, awesome for myself. So the next steps were along the lines of stylization and shot references and all the sort of normal stuff. In terms of stylization, Blackwater Gospel was something that I'd known for years but never really known how to do it, I guess. But that sort of styling mixed with the short stories from the World of Warcraft series, those two things were the main, obviously with lots of different sort of grungy aesthetics and things that I'd seen over the years all sort of mixed together. So the styling came down to this sort of almost cel shaded but quite grungy, quite almost like wood textures all over it. And I thought, through the whole process, that would suit a pirate story quite well. So that was where the styling, that sort of aesthetic came from. But because I'd sort of completely said, right, I'm not doing 3D anymore, because it was the technical side of 3D was holding me back from being creative and actually enjoying it. So I decided to completely go away from 3D and thought that that sort of style worked quite well as a 2D animation, and that was Bob's your uncle, all guns blazing. So within about 2 weeks of that first doodle storyboard, I had a redone blocked out Illustrator version of that storyboard using scene references and blocked out what assets I would need, and then went ahead and started working on the 2 captains and the 2 ships, because I thought that they were going to be the highlights of this whole animation. So if I can practice my styling on them and get the workflow and the process down, nailed to a T with those guys, that would then obviously lay the foundations for absolutely everything else I was going to be doing, all the different visual effects and everything. So I focused the next 2 weeks purely on nailing those 4 assets and those 4 things, and it turned out, actually really quite well. For the first real time I'd done something for myself in that way, it turned out better than I had ever expected, so I was happy enough with them. So moving on from those first 2 weeks, obviously with this project being my second attempt at a full animation from a major project, I obviously had quite limited time. My own fault, of course. But I had to make it compete with the other projects in my year. I had to make it, you know, worthy of a grade, worthy of it didn't really matter about the time frame. I was still competing with everything else, everyone else. So I had to really start thinking about how I was going to make this doable in the space of 3 months. So I needed to be clever, realistically, with how I was making the assets, how I was going to animate. So the assets were created essentially to fit the scenes, what was going to be seen, how they were going to be seen, what I was going to use them for, all that sort of stuff. The assets were not going to, so the characters, for example, all the focuses were going to be in their face, or at least the pirate captain. The face was going to be the focus. So I was going to put my time into that. The body wasn't going to be seen really. There wasn't going to be limbs. You weren't going to see anything else. So yes, it was character design, but it was realistically just design a face. And the ships were only ever going to be seen in one orientation. So I could use one asset, and then if I did it in a lot of detail up close, like 4 or 5 times the detail that I was going to be using in the actual animation, the resolution, stuff like that, and just design it really quite detailed. I could do close-ups, I could do wide angles, I could do medium shots of the same orientation of the ship, and really flesh out a full story, despite the fact that the assets themselves were not full turnarounds, every orientation, that sort of thing. So I just had to get quite clever with how I was making the assets, which did shoot me in the foot further down the process. But in terms of time management, I think I had to do that to make it work in the time that I'd given myself to make it. So, but yeah, once I got the idea of how to do it with the characters and the ships, I was able to, you know, carry that through to all the other assets. So, you know, cannons weren't fully seen in shots, so I didn't have to do the ends of them, didn't have to do all the ropes, didn't have to do the, you know, that sort of thing. I was just thinking about that for every asset and how I could just make it the most efficient I possibly could, whilst also being able to tell the full story. And then, with the same idea of just sort of efficiency in mind, moving on to researching how I was going to animate it. So, from the original project that I designed, I'd done a lot of research into different animation styles and that sort of stuff, and I'd remembered quite a few different things. But the main thing that caught my eye was the animation, again, the animations from the World of Warcraft, the way they've done it, like, very, I guess you could say, still assets. But because they've done this thanks to the parallax animation, where they've added a lot of motion to these scenes and brought them to life, I've seen it as a very effective way to tell a story, whilst also minimizing the technicalities of fully rigged characters and that sort of, I guess, the technical side of it all. That wasn't something I was too interested in. So this parallax style, and you also seen it a lot in like these oil paintings where people have taken an oil painting from whenever and cut it out and animated it and brought life to something that was still, and I just thought that was a really cool, quite a unique way of doing things, despite the fact that it actually made life a bit easier for me in terms of removing that technicality. I thought it was quite a unique and interesting way of doing things anyway, so I was like, you know, that's bang on. Especially whenever thinking about, you know, the efficiency side of things. Now, I still included, you know, for example, the traditional animation and that first scene with the walk cycle. That was just a video of myself rotoscoped and then 2D textured. It was more of a, I guess that was one of the biggest technical challenges, just because I wanted to do it for myself. It created a really strong walk cycle, and I was able to do it in my style. Even though it was, you know, traditional animation, it's still, I thought it was worth the time that I put into it. I think I could have added in more scenes if I'd just not done that walk cycle. But I think it was worthwhile because that was the main, this person is in chains, and it sets up the whole aesthetic and the whole theme for the rest of the thing. So I wanted to start off strong with a nice, powerful, traditional animation. So that's the reason why that was done that way, but everything else realistically was done in that sort of still 2D parallax. So yeah. Once the sort of style was there and how I was going to animate, there's just a few more technical tests in After Effects, like things like the rain and the sails waving and flags waving and those sorts of things that I wanted to include but didn't want to, you know, manually animate. Just apart from those tests, and from there it was ready to take in all those assets that I created and put them into After Effects and just start animating, really. So beyond that, and once the whole process had been done and the animation had been completed and different iterations and different changes being made throughout it from talking to tutors and getting feedback and stuff like that. The one thing that sort of kept coming up on any sort of review, especially in a couple of weeks ago with my last presentation, it was one point of contention that's been recognized basically throughout the whole process, was in general the storytelling. So the idea behind the whole story, and I could have brought this up earlier in this vlog, but this is realistically the foundation for all the points of, I guess, review and self-reflection on this project. The whole idea of the story and the background narrative, as it were, is based on the modern day romanticized idea of piracy, the golden era of piracy in the Caribbean. And it's for example, things like Pirates of the Caribbean or Black Sails, where piracy is romanticized as this, true freedom and idea of camaraderie, where all the pirates are the protagonists, if not initially, then eventually they become this symbol for, I guess just a symbol for freedom and this way of life. And the colonists, or whoever the American Navy or the British Navy, are always seen as the antagonists, trying to destroy these, people who live by honor and camaraderie or whatever. But that's the modern day sort of idea that I like. So I like this whole romanticized idea of it, and I wanted to play on that. And the way I wanted to play on it was basically by not ignoring the fact that pirates were criminals. Like, they broke the law, and realistically they were antagonists. They were just whatever that way you want to look at that. So that's why I wanted to play on it. So the way I was going to do that was by not just having these pirates be a protagonist for the sake of entertainment, as it would be, or whatever, and I wanted to make it a bit, I guess, ambiguous. That was the idea, where it wasn't just going to be these pirates are the good guys and we should all support their way of life and their freedom and all that sort of stuff, because that is a romanticized idea, but I wanted to play on it. So this idea of ambiguity then comes from where these pirates could just be thieves, and the person in chains could just be a fellow pirate being freed whilst the ship is being robbed, and this pirate was probably going to be hung, but now that the other pirates have come along, they freed them, and all the criminals are happy ever after, and you could consider just the pirates were the antagonists in this whole situation. Or perhaps this royal ship was in fact in the slave trade. Obviously something that would be criminal nowadays, but in that era, in that time of piracy, that would just be a legitimate business. So if a pirate, a criminal, were to attack and rob this ship and freeze the slaves, that then puts a question on who the true protagonist or antagonist in this story would be in a modern day view. So the ambiguity of this person in chains being either a slave or a fellow criminal then feeds into the ambiguity of who the protagonist and the antagonist in this story truly is, and if there isn't, or if there even is one. So that's the narrative in my head. That was the narrative in my head through the whole design process, but telling that narrative was a lot more difficult than I had expected to do in a minute, purely because I'd never done it before. So telling a story purely in my way was, a new experience. So yeah, that was basically the biggest point of contention throughout the entire design, and it raised questions of raised questions and raised suggestions to scenes, and adding in bits here and changing timing of particular scenes and that sort of thing that really got very logical. And every time I heard it, it was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense, and it would help tell the narrative of the story immensely. But with the whole design process that I've talked about already, I essentially just shot myself in the foot. And with the whole time restraint that I put on myself, it became, although this could make more narrative sense, I'm now in a position where I can't do it because of the time restraints that I put on myself. And essentially it all comes down to the fact that the entire storyboard was based on this song. So whenever I first seen the the whenever I first heard the music, I was writing down the storyboard and stuff like that. It became a very clear, I guess, too clear. It became very etched into my head. You know, this scene at this transition at this point in the song, and then I edited the song to take out to take out parts and cut it down, and basically made this thing that was in my head impenetrable. So all the timing of the music, all the tempo, all the build up was purely based on this song and this storyboard, and I ran with it from the get go. So everything I'd done was based purely on this song, these timings, this transition, this point, whatever. So whenever it came to finally showing the animation in its because obviously it only took from 1 month to the next to do the whole thing, and someone turns around and goes, if you're able to just, you know, add in a slight pause here, or, you know, just 2 seconds to hold on this camera, this cannon just before it fires, it would make, oh right, so, you know, you're telling the story, you're going back to keeping things clear in people's minds, and it made everything that was ever said to me made perfect sense, and that led to this sort of real frustration where I would spend a week trying to make something slower, make something quicker, try and pause the music, try to do something like that, but every time I went back to it and tried to make this change or these couple of changes, it would break the whole momentum of the animation because it was so, the foundation was too unmovable, and essentially I just shot myself in the foot. And it's hard to look at it now going, I wish I had done this from the start, but just whenever I'm reflecting on what could have been, looking into better ways to narrate, like a narrator almost, to tell the story, because that works really well in the styles that I've seen. And I think the whole storytelling aspect is my biggest, not regret necessarily, but something that I wish I'd had that extra bit of time to flesh it out before I had to just run with it, because I realistically I had to just run with it. And all the changes I could make, like small things where at the end the chains weren't in focus long enough, so just changing the timing of that scene slightly where I could, so that it still made sense in the grand scheme of things, still looked the way I wanted it, but it helped just that little bit more with telling the story. Perfect. Like, that was, all those sort of things were perfect, but it was just the ones where adding in a scene or cutting somewhere different or all that sort of stuff, you know, slightly broke my heart, but it's fine. Yeah, overall, love how it turned out. Absolutely love it. I couldn't have pictured it better in my head when I first scribbled it down. I couldn't have imagined what it was going to become. So, for my first time actually making something for myself and in a style that I'd never done before, but a style that I've always loved, and to music that I loved, and it all turned out sort of exactly how I pictured it in my head. And obviously, from a narrative sense, it could have been better, but I couldn't be happier with what I've made, and I'm really quite proud to claim it as my own, which is quite nice. But yeah, overall, thanks to all the lecturers who sort of gave me all the feedback and helped me out, especially Andrew Melky, who kept me on the straight and narrow for the past few months and made sure I was doing what I was saying I was going to do each week and all that sort of stuff. So I hope you all enjoy the animation as much as I've enjoyed making it. So happy days.